All right. Hello and welcome to episode 141. It's a pleasure today to be joined by Ingrid Rojas Contreras. And a little bit about her is that she was born and raised in Bogota, Colombia. Her first novel, Fruit of the Drunken Tree, was a silver medal winner in first fiction from the California Book Awards and a New York Times editor's choice. Her essays and short stories have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Buzzfeed, Nylon, and Guernica, among others. Rojas Contreras has received numerous awards and fellowships from Breadloaf Writers Conference, VONA, Hedgebrook, the Camargo Foundation, and the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture. She is a visiting writer at St. Mary's College, and it sounds like now USF, University of San Francisco. And we are mainly going to talk today about her family memoir, about her grandfather, a curandero from Colombia, who was said had the power to move clouds. And that was the explanation of the book before it was published. Um, the book is unbelievable, incredible.
Thank
That's going to
you.
be the bulk of our talking today. I was telling you before we were recording, my friend whose family's from Colombia, his last name happens to be Camargo, so he loved the fact that it was the Camargo Foundation. Tell us a little bit about working with like that foundation, the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture. I'm sorry. First of all, welcome.
Thank you.
I, I forgot the obvious, but I guess just like I guess the community of writers. You're a professor of writing, and obviously you have these two critically acclaimed, excellent books. Just about how much help you get, how much help you give, just what the community of writers means. All these foundations, all these groups, and all these universities.
I mean, I'm very thankful that there's all of these ways in the US to make writing and to find community.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I'm very thankful that there is kind of a path to become a writer, and get support for your writing. I know that Europe is better
Oh yeah.
um, than here. But I also know that the United States is better than Colombia is at supporting the arts.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, so I think as an immigrant to this country, that was one of the things that I was just felt very supported by.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, like there was a time when um I had like a number of different visas, and then that means that you can't apply for certain things.
Hmm.
And I think that's changing now, but you still kind of see it, which I don't get. Like if you're an undocumented writer, for example, you might not be able to apply to some of the grants and some of the awards,
Hmm.
where I feel like if you are undocumented, you're having a quintessential American experience.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
So to me, like that's who should be getting
Hmm.
um that those awards and that money and that time and that institutional support. But I have seen some places, change.
Hmm.
So that's but yeah, but I feel like everyone should, all of the undocumented writers for sure should be able to apply to things. Um,
Yeah.
the Camargo Foundation is in France.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
and they're a wonderful residency, and maybe it's been like my favorite residency that I've done. It was this beautiful apartment, and it's in this little, it feels like I'm not sure, but it feels like it was like a fisherman's village.
Oh, okay.
And there was this topless beach that was maybe 5 minutes from where I was staying. And I just
Uh-huh.
had this rhythm of writing in the morning and then going to the topless beach and then buying food from the market and then going back to the apartment and hanging out with the other people there. And there
Oh.
was something so, I mean, dreamy about all of that.
Oh man. So cool. Well, thank you. You obviously make that great point about like if those fellowships, those scholarships, if they should be for anyone, they should be for, the type of people you're talking about, right? Undocumented and those people, like you said, are the quintessential. You said it much better than I did, but that's great to hear that it's changing even in the even since you've known about it. Um, you you talk about that dreamy like getaway and getting into a rhythm and just finding that place to write. Obviously, I mean, you traffic in words for a living. You grew up speaking Spanish, obviously. And you talk about a lot of the indigenous like roots of your family. I would love to know, like, did like a lot of the indigenous words come into the Spanish of your area of Colombia? I mean, you do write about that a bit in the book, but like, is that something that's known? Like, could you have told, could you have said that at age 13? Like this, this word has indigenous roots. Like, we'll talk
I
more
don't
definitely
know.
about indigeneity and Colombia, but just specifically the language. Sorry to
Yeah,
be so long winded.
no. I think that when I was that young, I don't think that I could tell the difference. But now that I'm older, there is kind of a phonetics to the words that are indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's also that we have borrowed at this point indigenous words that are not just from Colombia, but are from the Americas.
Okay.
And in the United States has as well, like aguacate
Mm,
is an indigenous word, and you
right.
say avocado, but
Right.
it's like coming from that. And I think most people actually can, go through their life speaking Spanish and then not have an awareness of which words are,
Mm,
rooted in the native languages and which ones are imported.
right.
The fascinating thing about language is that it's just a living organism
Mm-hmm.
and it's changing all the time, and we're creating it as we live.
Mm,
I think about people who, for example, grow up in the US and they speak both English and Spanish. And then their way of speaking uses both. And then you create kind of like a third language
mm-hmm.
that is very creative. And when you hear it, it's just there's a creativity about it and a
Yeah.
spark about it that is amazing. Yeah, so it's always changing and it's always kind of carrying our
Mm-hmm.
history.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of your history, in the latest book, there's so much about obviously about your grandpa, Nono, right? And your mom, being the daughter of him, right? I mean, your maternal side, your maternal grandfather, and not a lot in the book is necessarily mentioned about reading about literature, but definitely a lot about just the oral stories. And I love there were some scenes where you and some family members would sit around, you try to like bore each other the most,
Yeah.
right? Because you're trying to get what I think your Theo to go to sleep or something like that, right?
Yeah,
And so
we have this like hidden or secret errands that we're trying uh to plan, which is the secret errand is that we want to disinter my grandfather and nobody's supposed to know about it. And so my aunt's husband, obviously my mom and I visiting, he would want to hang out and he would want,
right.
hear us talk and everything. But we just really wanted to plan, and we were like, how do we how do we get him to go?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my mother came up with this, and we didn't even discuss it, but she just started to tell the most boring story. I've never heard her tell a boring story. So I think all of us were just like, oh, she's trying to get him to go to bed. And then we just kind of took turns telling the most boring things that we could think of. And I know that when it was my turn, I told a story about being at the airport and then, trying to find the place to nap and then not finding it. So just like pointless stories that are about waiting and not even getting the thing that you wanted. I tried very hard to not laugh
Right, right.
while we were doing that.
Well, go ahead. I'm gonna go downstairs and grab some water. Go ahead and just go and tell that story about the airport. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Sound good? So the most mundane stories. What would be the word in Spanish? How would you say mundane? What would be that word you would use in Espanol?
Mm. I
Las,
guess
son
what I would want
historias o
to
cuentos? Historias?
I guess what I would want to say would be like cuentos aburridos,
Okay.
which is kind of like, oh yeah, I wonder if that comes from, yeah, I don't know what the etymology is.
Hmm.
It could be burro. I don't know, but you
Okay.
can do this wonderful thing in Spanish where you, depending on the, if I want to say very boring, I
Okay.
would say aburridísimo. So
Eh,
there's this ending that you can add to the word to make it.
uh-huh.
I don't know. So it's quite beautiful Spanish with just the way that you can tinker with each word and
Okay.
kind of shift the meaning of it.
Right. I don't know if it's just Mexicans, but they'll use instead of isimo, they'll use on. So like every baby is like cacheton,
Oh yeah,
cachetona,
yeah, we do that. Yeah.
right? See on and ona, isimo. So
Yeah.
I feel like my conversation with you today will probably be one of the most like circular, which I usually have. I mean, I have my outline. It's usually very, but the book doesn't necessarily go in chronological order. I mean, it doesn't.
Right.
And just obviously circles are a huge symbol of the book too. So, um, you were talking about language and its importance and the way you can create things in Spanish and so many other languages. Like your grandfather, who you talk about, he early on in the book, you describe him as, even on his business card, right, which was kind of a funny story. Not kind of, it was a funny story, but like homeopath, is that how you pronounce it? Versus curandero. So like what are like the connotations of those in Colombia,
In Colombia.
in your
Okay.
area at that time?
Yeah. So when we say curandero, basically the connotation of it is you're kind of saying shaman is what you're
Okay.
saying. It
Okay.
kind of carries that same connotation. And I think, the historical weight of that is that you're um talking about someone who is, has a different kind of type of medicine, and they're probably using plant knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
but you're kind of discrediting it, or
Uh-huh.
you're kind of calling it I don't know, kind of like a hack a little bit. So it
Okay.
has that tone to it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say homeopath, which I think the definition of it is someone who um I think does tinctures, like plant
Sure,
tinctures,
sure.
um that it sounds scientific,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds, it sounds like it's in that it sounds polite, or just like the polite
Right.
way of saying it.
Right. Right. And so you write about how, and of course, backtracking, this is the man who could move clouds. And well, let me ask you this question too. Is who's the protagonist of the book? I mean, it's the man who can move clouds is referring to no, your grandfather, your mom, and there's the lineage of the amnesia and such. Like, is there one protagonist or not necessarily?
I don't think there is. um I think that all three are the protagonists.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was thinking about when I was writing the book is how the story gets carried by each person
Mm-hmm.
through time.
Right.
And sometimes that story is being carried by my grandfather, and then my mother carries it, and then
Mm.
I go back to my grandfather carrying it,
Right.
and then I go to me carrying it. I was very interested in this idea of a story that can be told across three lifetimes.
Right.
And I was very interested in telling just a very big story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the reason why I became very interested in that is just because there were so many parallels between the stories. So it felt, as a storyteller, when you have certain things that feel like they're rhythms,
Mm-hmm.
like you have like these things that kind of like look the same, then to me, kind of like, I don't know, musically, it just feels like I want to use that, or I want to somehow like highlight that.
Right. Well, there was a scene in the book where you're at the airport, and it sounds like maybe the adults knew better than you did. Like this could have been dangerous. Like you like kind of like, hey, let's go talk behind the curtain type of thing or whatever. And it's during the situation times in Colombia, as it's called, and all that. But you were just like asking questions, right? You were like a journalist. You like had, I don't know if you literally had a notepad, but you were asking questions, right? So I guess like the bigger question is, this is a book that it reminds me a lot. Are you familiar with Jean Guerrero?
Yes.
Her book Crux
Mm,
is one of my favorites because it
mm,
like you, I'm like, there's like there's science involved, there's history involved for sure. There's like what, sociology, there's, boom, boom, boom. Well, there's a million things that you get involved in, and some of it is just pure, just great, solid journalism. What was it like to write about you? Like in some way, I know you use first person to write about yourself, but in some ways you're kind of like the ghosts that go throughout the book. You're kind of like disembodied, you're like
Yeah.
watching yourself. Like how was that?
Yeah, I think it is more comfortable for me to write about other people than it is about writing about myself.
Yeah.
Um, so I found my way writing the memoir and then constantly having to go back and then put more of myself in there.
Mm-hmm.
And partly it's just that I think naturally I'm someone who likes observing and I'm someone who likes to listen. And I just really love gathering stories and just making sure that somebody's life can be heard, or that I can in some way honor them by telling their
Mm.
story very well.
Right.
And I just get so lost in that when it comes to talking about myself or like what I was experiencing, it's almost like I have to remind myself that I should do that. um,
Right.
and it was that way with the memoir. And all of, I think the other reason why I was maybe like resisting it a little bit was just because the writing that I had to do about myself would then have to, it just required an emotional excavation, and I had to talk about um trauma, and I had to talk about things that I just wasn't sure how to write about, or how they might be painful to me or harmful to me if I put them on paper, or if I kind of like dug them up.
Mm.
So it was just like a very kind of slower process that I was doing for myself. In a book like this one, where my mother is, very freely sharing stories with me about things that she's lived through, or, brutality of men that she's, been at the receiving end of. But
Mm-hmm.
it also felt like I had to do the same, that she was doing, if not more.
Right. Obviously, after the fact, the book is so much more than the sum of its parts. There's an alchemy there that makes it just an incredible experience, just a work of art, really. But
Thank you.
like in the beginning, like how did you pitch this book? Like,
I told I told I told my editor who edited Fruit of the Drunken Tree, Margot Schickmenter, about it early on as I was working on it. And what I pitched was that it was going to be a family story, and that it was going to be about, my grandfather, who people said could move clouds, and then my mother, who people said could appear in two places at once. And I said it's a story about like things that you inherit and what you don't inherit, and it's a story about healing. So
mm.
that was my short pitch for it. I think what really did it is that my editor got to meet my mother, actually,
Mm.
because we were in New York. I was doing a TV show, and I flew my mother there so that she could be there
Ah,
with me, and I thought it would be like so special for her to see that.
okay.
And yeah, and so like my editor got to meet my mother, and I had already been telling my editor the kinds of stories that are in the book that are, you know, to someone who's in the US and unfamiliar with the culture, it just sounds, fantastical. It just sounds like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
But she got to meet my mother, and I just heard my editor say like, so your father could move clouds. And then my mom would be like, yeah, and tell her a story about it. So I think even meeting my mother and seeing the source of
Mhm.
where I was getting, many of the stories, that it just I think that just made her like really interested in what it could be.
Right. It's a great touch in the book that you include a lot of pictures. And like when I saw the first picture of your grandfather, I was like, oh, okay. Like it really does ground you and like, oh, he's real.
Yeah.
He's real.
Yeah. I've always really loved memoirs that have photos in it, but I
Hmm.
I don't know if I didn't want to do the type of memoir that has photos and it's kind of an illustration of the story where
Right.
where you say like, this is, you're telling a scene about a wedding and then you might see some wedding photos. I wasn't interested in that, but I was more thinking about the images as carrying a different part of the story that I wasn't writing
Yes.
out loud. Um, and I took this Polaroid camera with me to Colombia for when I was, living out the events in the book.
Right.
And I just became very interested in trying to photograph um evidence of the surreal,
Hmm.
like when, if I was talking with an aunt and she was telling me about this ghost that she had been seeing since she was a little girl and she was describing it and we were looking at the spot where this ghost appeared, then I would take out my Polaroid camera and then I would photograph it. So I
Mm.
was really kind of trying to photograph traces of the ghostly,
Right.
things that we can't see, but then people are experiencing in some way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I was very interested in doing that.
Well, amazing coincidence or not is that your mother experienced a traumatic injury in 1964 and you in 2007 that led to amnesia,
Yeah,
right? Hers was falling down a well, possibly being pushed,
possibly.
possibly, right?
By a
Would have
person or a ghost, we're not, or we don't know.
right. And yours was going to what? Going to pick up or bring back a black dress, and your mom had just told you don't mess with the dress basically, or don't get
Yeah,
that
she
dress.
said this dress has very dark energy and
Yes.
it's gonna make you into a widow, which I wasn't even married. So I was like, what is this
Yeah.
warning?
Yeah. Don't mess with the dress. I just made up. That'd be a good TV show. Which, by the way, you were a TV star apparently too in New York, but that's for a different
Oh
part.
no, this was when I was there. I was in Seth Meyers.
Oh,
Yeah, so that's what we were in town for, and I got my mom to come out
oh,
because I
cool.
just really wanted her to see it, and I just really wanted her to be there with me.
Oh, what a cool experience.
Yeah.
So the book, mostly starts with the idea of those two amnesia events. You, like you describe it, I think, as well as you possibly can describe, like a nothingness, right? At times,
Amnesia.
yes, yes. The amnesia. I mean, just a blank slate. That what tabula rasa is like you were talking on the phone, you realize, oh, I can speak Spanish. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, like, how do you even when you have amnesia, like, how do you even know what different languages are? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
how did you explain it so well? But like, even how can you explain to us, like, what is it like to be a blank slate, but
Yeah.
also know what a mirror is? Like, at least,
Yeah.
you know, like how blank is blank?
Um, it was really fascinating. It was almost like sometimes I would see something and then remember what it was. Um, and I don't know too much about how um you know the information is like stored in your brain or how that works fully. But I know that what can happen is that some connections are severed when you have a head injury, and
Right.
it doesn't mean that the information is erased,
Mm-hmm.
but only that it becomes kind of an island
Yeah.
that doesn't have any links going through it.
Mm.
But your brain is so good at regenerating that it can then form different connections, but just from a different place. So
Mm.
sometimes with people who have amnesia and they have to recover their memory, or they have to kind of recover, um, how do you learn a language? It's about trying to find or trying to make your brain make a different connection to that island of
Right.
knowledge that you
Right.
already have. And it all just, right, so like you hit your head and then whatever connections you are now messed up are the things that you can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
Um So, so anything could have happened really. And my mother and I were very lucky that
Yeah.
we didn't, we didn't lose our ability to understand language, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also other people who retain their memory of the past and then are not able to make memories in the present.
Right.
So all
How
kinds of
sad that is.
things can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think for myself, I was just kind of walking through the city, and then as I was walking through, I would see something, and then there would be this lag that would happen.
Mm.
Then I would recall the name of the thing, or sometimes I wouldn't be able to recall
Mm-hmm.
what it was.
Mm. Mirrors are a big, motif throughout the book, and I mean, you pretty quickly after the accident, you find a mirror, maybe accidentally, like it's like what, a window or something, and then your mom, was what, maybe 8 or 9 years old,
Mm-hmm.
right? And her father, no, had nursed her back to health, but it sounded like she had horrific, like, bruising and swelling and
Yeah.
stitches, and right, and so she didn't want to see the mirror, right? Because she could tell by people's looks that that kind of thing. What, like, again, maybe impossible to explain, but like, before you saw a mirror, like, would you have like no idea what you look like? Would you,
I had no idea what I looked
like,
like.
you could be 7'3", you would have no idea,
Honestly, I didn't even, it wasn't only until I saw this black
like an
window,
outer. Uh-huh.
um and I thought that I was just making eye contact with a stranger.
Whoa, yeah, right.
I thought that that was just someone that I was just happened to look at.
Mm.
And but there was something in the looking where what I was feeling in that moment was kind of creepily but faithfully reproduced in the stare back that I got. And
Mm.
so I did like this double take, and then I saw the reflection do a double take. And then in that moment, I understood that I was looking at
Whoa.
myself.
Whoa.
Um, but before that moment, I was surprised that I was a woman because I
Mm-hmm.
had no idea. I was just like neither gender. I didn't kind of completely understand that I had a body,
Sure.
even. And yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the beauty of the book is that you describe it, like I said, as well as a human being possibly can, being that what, like 0.00% of us, 3% of us have experienced it, but also there's that, the unknowing, the part that you maybe couldn't even explain to yourself, that just the feeling, the visceral part of it, that we're,
Yeah.
left to wonder about, which there's no way to explain it, right?
Yeah. I think that moment with the window, later when I was thinking about that moment, and maybe even when I had recovered my memory, it just became such a almost like a, mythological moment, or just
Mm,
thinking about like what was the first time when we did see ourselves
right,
as people.
right.
And there's a chapter in the book that is kind of wondering about that. But to me, like the amnesia felt like an opportunity to go back to the origin of myself as a person, but also just of a human being as a
Mm,
person. Like, what is
mm-hmm,
it that makes us who we are? Why am I this way? Why are you that way?
mm,
What makes each of us, have our personality traits, or like our like distinctness. Where does that
mm-hmm,
come from?
mm,
Um, and having amnesia, and then suddenly no longer having any of those markers that we might use to build an identity from,
mm,
for example, saying like, I'm Colombian, I'm a woman, I'm, all of those things that we just attach to our identity,
mm.
no longer having any of that. I just remember being so fascinated by that question of, if I don't have any of that, um, then what am I? Because it
Yeah.
didn't even feel like who am I, but it felt like a what am I
Okay.
question.
Yeah.
And it was such a surreal, kind of stark place to be in. And I just completely loved being there as well.
Wow, that's an important last sentence there. Thank you for that explanation. I'm reminded of two like disparate things. I think what when you talk about like almost like humans seeing themselves or seeing the world for the first time, like the story. I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but the story is that like when the Spanish came, I think to like Dominican Republic, maybe like on the first visit, is that the Taino people the saw the Spanish with horses on horses and thought it was one thing,
One,
right?
yeah.
And it's like I was thinking about that. I'm like, how could you blame them? Like, yeah, like that's
I mean,
one
of
thing.
course, anyone would. Like if you,
That's the
yeah, anyone.
first, right? I'm
Like
always just thinking
like
about
there's a way in which we only think like, wow, why would you do that when we know that it's two separate things? But
right.
yeah, if you don't,
If you know, have you have no, yeah, yeah, right. And the second is, have you seen the movie? And the name is escaping me. The Jim Carrey movie about the loss of memory, the
oh,
Eternal Sunshine of a
that's
Spotless Mind.
not this fine. Yeah, I've seen it. It's been like a really long time since I've
Yeah.
seen that. I know that I saw it before I lost my memory,
Ah.
not after.
Oh wow.
I do think that, I mean, generally I tend to be not super impressed with the imagination of amnesia.
Huh.
Um, in fiction or in movies. And there's a way in which that can be used in a very I don't know, stereotypical way or like a
Yeah.
very flashy way.
Right. Right. Right.
Um, the one movie that I think to me is the closest to amnesia that isn't even about amnesia is
Mm.
Solaris, which is
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the Andrei Tarkovsky version.
Okay.
Did you see that?
I did. It's what year would that have come out? I'm trying to think how long ago that would have been.
When is that from?
I can probably look it up here.